Task 1 contains 5 questions in total. From question 1.1 to question 1.5. For question 1.1 to 1.4, you will be asked to demonstrate your understanding of text 1 and text 2 by answering a number of analytical questions. Now, text 1 is normally provided in a written format, so it may be a novel, a poem, an article, or anything of the sort. On the other hand, text 2 is provided in a visual format, so it may be a movie, a documentary, or anything else of the sort. And they say you're provided with a number of analytical questions. So they give you 1.1 to 1.4, meaning you have 4 of those questions. And these can be separated into 2 sections with 2 questions each. The first 2 questions focuses on text 1, while the last 2 questions focus on text 2. In total, these questions will award you a total of 10 marks. If you answer all of them correctly, of course. Timing recommendation for question parts 1.1 to 1.4 is 15 minutes, which means that you have approximately 5 minutes to answer each question if you want to be able to answer all of them. For question 1.5, you'll be asked to compare and contrast text 1 and text 2. And as you can see, the timing recommendation for question 1.5 is 35 minutes, which is way longer than you have for each question for question 1.1 to question 1.4, which also means that this is an essay question. It's a compare and contrast essay that the question will ask you to write. An essay that compares and contrasts text 1 and text 2. The fact that they're asking you this question to begin with means that the ideas and topics discussed within text 1 and text 2 are similar to the point where you will be able to identify similarities and differences that you can input within the essay. And although that you are also provided analytical questions to answer, the main point of task 1 and the LNL assessment is actually the compare and contrast essay, which holds the most marks. The questions prior to this question are provided for the purpose of giving you ideas on what you can actually write in the essay. The questions are structured in a way where they actually are similar to what the questions of the essay will be. So they'll provide you ideas and evidence that you could possibly use for the essay. So although they don't hold that many marks, it's actually very important if you want to be able to get points and ideas for the compare and contrast essay later on. The criteria being assessed are criterion A, which stands for analyzing, and criterion B, which stands for organizing. Criterion A applies for all questions, from question 1.1 to question 1.4, as all the questions require you to analyze either text 1 or text 2 or even both of them. On the other hand, criterion B, organizing, applies only for the last question 1.5, because organizing mainly focuses on the structure of the essay, the usage of transitional signals, and generally the way you structure your points and ideas. So they don't really apply to the first 4 questions. Before we start looking at both text 1 and text 2, one thing that you should understand is that before the e-assessment begins, there will be a 5-minute reading time period where you'll be able to look through the e-assessment software and know how the examination functions. But during this time period, it's also important that you look through both of the texts and have a general idea on what topic they'll be asking you to discuss. Of course, you have no time to read each line, each page thoroughly, but then skimming and scanning through both of the texts will be very useful because you'll be able to straight away go to the questions and know where to look through in text 1 and text 2 to find your answer. But for the purpose of the video, of course, I'll be going through each text thoroughly. Starting with text 1, before each text is introduced to you, the exam will provide you a short description of what the text is about. Although it may not seem like this, the details provided here they may seem like it's not very important, but later on for question 1.5, the essay question, the details provided here are very important for you to be able to include in the essay, as you will have to introduce the essays in the text in the introductory paragraph, in which these details are very important to take note of. Because from this short paragraph, we can see a few pieces of information given to us. Text one is an excerpt. So actually, text one generally, most of the time, will not be the entire piece of work. It'll just be an excerpt because it'll be too long to be provided. So they'll give you an excerpt that you can analyze within a short time period. The same goes for text two, which is mostly maximum a 5-minute video. They wouldn't go beyond that because they understand the examiners understand that you don't have the time to analyze more than that. So text one is an excerpt from Isaac Asimov's The Fun They Had. So this is the author. The Fun They Had is the title of the text. And exploring the concept of schools in the future. This is basically a short summary of what the text is going to talk about. It was first published in 1951, and this is the published date. So actually get a lot of information just from this. So it's good to keep an eye out for these things because they're very important. Now starting off with the text itself. What's it about? School. Margie was scornful. School? What's there to write about school? I hate school. Margie had always hated school. But now, she hated it more than ever. The mechanical teacher had been giving her test after test in geography, and she had been doing worse and worse until her mother shaken her head sorrowfully and sent for the county inspector. Just from this paragraph, we get a main idea. Margie is the main character. She's a person who hates school, which you can see all over. I hate school. Margie had always hated school, but now she hated it more than ever. And also just from the way that Margie is talking, we get the idea that she's sort of a kid. She's a young kid going to school. She's not that old. Because the way she expresses her thoughts are simply, I hate school. And that's the end of it. And another important thing that we can take notice of is the usage of the phrase, the mechanical teacher. Just from looking at the details here, we see that the main idea of this text is to explore how schools are in the future. And the fact that the mechanical teacher is shown is expressing that the idea that this future has very advanced technology, artificial intelligence is very advanced, a lot of computers, and that the teachers actually teach students are not human teachers, but actually mechanical teachers. Moving on, he was a round little man with a red face, which is a description for the county inspector, and a whole box of tools and dials and wires. He smiled at her and gave her an apple that took the teacher apart. Margie had hoped he wouldn't know how to put it back together, but he knew how all right. And after an hour or so, there it was again. Large and black and ugly with a big screen on. This is basically a description for the mechanical teacher, on which all the lessons were shown and the questions were asked. That wasn't so bad. The part she hated the most was the slot where she had to put homework and test papers. She always had to write them out in a punch code that they made her learn when she was 6 years old, and the mechanical teacher calculated the mark in no time. The inspector had smiled after he finished and patted her head. He said to her mother, "It's not the little girl's fault, Mrs. Jones. I think the geography sector was geared a little too quick." So the fact that they say geared a little too quick gives you an idea on how mechanical teachers actually work. The teachers are geared according to the learning capabilities and speed of each specific student to match the capabilities of the student and allow them to learn as efficiently as possible. Those things happen sometimes. I've slowed it up to an average 10-year level, so Margie is 10 years old. Actually, the overall pattern of her progress is quite satisfactory, and he patted Margie's head again. We can actually tell the inspector's characterization just from this. See, the inspector had smiled, patted her head, and generally he has a kinder demeanor. He didn't put down Margie saying that she was dumb or anything. She said this is quite satisfactory for her level, which generally shows that he's not someone who will say any negative things. Margie was disappointed. She had been hoping they would take the teacher away altogether. They had once taken Tommy's teacher away for nearly a month because the history sector had blanked out completely. Here's the introduction of another character named Tommy. And just from the way that Margie is introducing Tommy, he's most likely a friend, someone of the same age. So she said to Tommy, "Why would anyone write about school?" And this phrase itself may feel confusing because this entire text is just an excerpt, it's not the entire novel. But if we look at the beginning of the excerpt, it's a bit easier to tell what they mean by that phrase. So we can see a bit of a dialogue here. What's it about school? This dialogue is actually said by Margie, while this one is the reply is given by Tommy. So Margie asks, "What's it about?" Tommy replies, "It's about school." He said to Tommy, "Why would anyone write about school?" Meaning they're reading a piece of text of some sort that talks about school. And Margie, as you can tell, she hates school. She's going on a rant about how she hates school. She goes on about mechanical teachers, how she learns and all that. She gives an idea of what the educational system is like in the future in Margie and Tommy's reality. Tommy looked at her with very superior eyes. You see that Tommy himself is very conceited because it's not our kind of school, stupid. This is the old kind of school that we had hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So the school that we have now, where we have human teachers, all students gather in a classroom, humans teach us. This is considered old and something that was present hundreds and hundreds of years ago, emphasizing that this is something that occurs in the future. Margie was hurt. Well, I don't know what kind of school they had all that time ago. She read the book over his shoulder for a while, then said, "Anyway, they had a teacher." Sure, they had a teacher, but it wasn't a regular teacher. It was a man. So the idea of a human teacher is not regular. It's not something that people would normally see within this period of time. A man? How could a man be a teacher? Well, he just told the boys and girls things and gave them homework and asked them questions. A man isn't smart enough. Sure he is. My father knows as much as my teacher. Margie believes that a human is not capable of educating students, that they're not smart enough to be able to pass on any sort of information or any sort of knowledge, and that only humanoid teachers are capable of doing that. He can't. A man can't know as much as a teacher. He knows almost as much, I betcha. Margie wasn't prepared to dispute that. She said, "I wouldn't want a strange man in my house to teach me." Tommy screamed with laughter. "You don't know much, Margie. The teachers didn't live in the house. They had a special building and all the kids went there, which is the school that we have now. And all the kids learned the same thing. Sure, if they were the same age. But my mother says a teacher has to be adjusted to fit the mind of each boy and girl it teaches, and that each kid has to be taught differently." So this is basically the end of the excerpt. We can see it's kind of cut off. And this paragraph just further emphasizes that each teacher is geared towards the capabilities of each student. And here there's just extra information. This is the author, and really gives you information about the publication, the publishing company, the date it was published, and what pages it was published in. Extra information that you can take notice of. And moving on to the analytical questions. As mentioned before, the first two questions focuses on text 1. Starting off with question 1, the first thing you should notice when answering these questions are the command terms used, as well as the number of marks that are given for the question. They sort of give you an idea on how much elaboration and detail they want you to provide within the answer. We can see that there's only 2 marks, it's common, and in comparison to another command term, such as, for example, analyzed down here, that contains actually 3 marks, they do not require that much explanation, elaboration. They just want you to give a simple answer that has a decent amount of explanation where they can understand your point. And also please take notice that all the answers that are provided here are quite extensive, and that this much extension is normally not necessary to score full marks in the assessment. You also most likely will not have time to write this extensively, but this is just for the sake of showing what you could possibly write as the answers. And one model that I suggest that you use when answering any sort of analytical questions, whether it may be the questions itself and the essay later on, is the PEE model, which stands for